Hello, where are you watching us from today? Tell us your city and country in the comments. If this story moves you as much as it does us, don't forget to subscribe and like it, so more people can experience this incredible love story. Do you believe love can overcome all social barriers? Join us on this emotional journey that will change your perspective forever. The Madrid sun timidly filtered through the worn curtains of the small apartment in Carabanchel. Esperanza Garcia woke up before her alarm, as she had every morning for 4 years. The habit of getting up at 5:30 had become as natural as breathing, although her body still protested with every movement. She quietly made her way to the small room next door, where Valentina slept, hugging a teddy bear that had already lost half of its original fur. At 4 years old, her daughter was a perfect mix of fragility and strength, inheriting her father's bright green eyes and her own silent determination that characterized the women of her family. "Valentina, my love, it's time to get up," Esperanza whispered, gently stroking the girl's brown hair. The little girl slowly opened her eyes, smiling immediately when she saw her mother. It was a smile that had the power to light up any grey day, and Esperanza knew that this light was the only thing that had kept her going through the most difficult years of her life. "Are we going to the big house again, Mom?" Valentina asked in a sleepy voice, sitting up in bed. "Yes, honey, but remember what I told you. You have to be very quiet and not touch anything without permission." Esperanza had repeated these instructions hundreds of times. Working as a domestic worker in Santiago Mendoza's mansion in La Moraleja was the only job she had been able to find that allowed her to keep her small family afloat. With no relatives nearby and no money for a daycare, she had no choice but to take Valentina to work with her, hoping that the man of the house would never notice her presence. The subway ride from Carabanchel to La Moraleja lasted a little over an hour, but for Esperanza, it represented crossing not just the city, but completely different worlds. During the journey, Valentina pressed her nose against the train window, watching as the urban landscape gradually transformed from grey narrow buildings to wide tree-lined avenues and imposing mansions. "Mom, why's that house so big?" Valentina asked as they walked down the elegant tree-lined street toward the Mendoza residence. "Because the man who lives there worked very hard to get it," Esperanza replied, adjusting the small pink backpack her daughter was carrying. "We work hard too, don't we?" "Yes, Mom. When I'm big, I'm going to work very hard to buy you a big house too." Esperanza's heart filled with both tenderness and pain. Her daughter's innocence was both a blessing and a constant wound that reminded her of everything she couldn't give her. The Mendoza mansion stood imposingly behind wrought iron gates, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens that looked like something out of a decorating magazine. Esperanza knew every corner of that house after 2 years of working there, but she still felt like an intruder every time she crossed the threshold. Amparo, the 60-year-old cook who had worked for the family for more than 2 decades, greeted them at the service entrance with a warm smile. She was the only person in the house who knew about Valentina's existence and had promised to keep the secret. "Good morning, little one," Amparo whispered, giving Valentina a piece of a freshly baked muffin. "Did you bring your colored pencils today?" Valentina nodded enthusiastically, showing a small box of colored pencils that Esperanza had managed to buy at a €1 store. For the girl, those 12 basic pencils represented an entire world of creative possibilities. "Remember, honey," Esperanza said, kneeling down to her daughter's level, "you have to stay here in the kitchen with Mrs. Amparo. If you hear footsteps, you hide behind the pantry like we practiced, okay?" "Yes, Mom. I'll be very good." Esperanza kissed her daughter's forehead and headed for the main area of the house. Santiago Mendoza was a demanding but fair boss who was rarely home during working hours. According to Amparo, since his wife Elena's death 3 years ago, he had become a ghost in his own house, arriving late at night and locking himself in his office until the early hours. Esperanza's cleaning routine was meticulous and silent. She would start in the main living room, with its high ceilings and windows overlooking the garden, then continue through the dining room, the library, and finally the office. Each object was placed with millimeter precision, each surface shining without a single speck of dust. It was in the main living room that the portrait of Elena Mendoza, Santiago's deceased wife, hung, an elegant woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, captured by the painter, in a moment of serenity that radiated happiness. Esperanza always paused for a moment in front of that portrait, feeling a mixture of curiosity and respect for the woman who had lived in that house before she came to clean it. The days unfolded in a perfect and predictable routine Until that morning, something changed. Esperanza was vacuuming the living room when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Her heart immediately sped up. Santiago never came down before 10 in the morning, and the wall clock only showed 8:30. She quickly turned off the vacuum and headed for the kitchen to warn Amparo, but stopped short when she heard a deep male voice coming from that very place. "What is this?" Santiago's voice sounded more confused than angry. Esperanza felt the world stop around her. Her secret had been discovered, and with it, probably her only livelihood and her daughter's. With trembling legs, she made her way to the kitchen, preparing for the confrontation that could change their lives forever. Upon reaching the threshold of the door, the scene she found was completely different from what she had imagined. Santiago Mendoza, a tall man with dark hair lightly speckled with grey and intense brown eyes, was kneeling beside the kitchen table, watching with fascination a drawing that Valentina had been making. The little girl, far from being hidden as she had been taught, was looking at the man with curiosity and no trace of fear. "It's our house," Valentina said naturally, pointing to the paper where she had drawn a child's version of the mansion. "Well, it's not ours, but Mom and I work here." Santiago looked up at Valentina and then at the entrance where Esperanza remained paralyzed, not knowing whether to run away or face the consequences of her actions. How will Santiago react to discovering Esperanza's secret? Will this mean the end of her job and her stability? The silence in the kitchen stretched for several seconds that felt like an eternity. Santiago held Valentina's drawing in his hands, his eyes alternating between the small work of art and the girl who was watching him with a mixture of bravery and curiosity that was not common in someone her age. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mendoza," Esperanza began, her voice choked with nerves. "I can explain." Santiago raised a hand to stop her, but his gesture was not one of anger but of concentration. He continued to study the drawing, where Valentina had represented the mansion with shaky but life-filled lines. In the garden she had drawn a small figure with pigtails jumping among the flowers. "How old are you?" Santiago asked Valentina, his voice surprisingly soft. 4.5, the girl replied proudly. "Mom says I'll be 5 soon." "And you drew this yourself?" "Yes, I like to draw pretty houses. This house is the prettiest one I've ever seen in my whole life." Something changed in Santiago's expression. For the first time in years, a genuine smile appeared at the corners of his lips. It was barely perceptible, but Esperanza noticed it immediately, as well as the way the man's shoulders slightly relaxed. "It's a very good drawing," Santiago said, returning the paper to Valentina. "Do you have more?" The girl nodded enthusiastically and ran to her small backpack from which she pulled out several other papers. Santiago sat down in one of the kitchen chairs, something Amparo had never seen in her 20 years of working in that house, and observed each drawing with the same attention he would give to a multi-million-dollar contract. "Sir, I'm so sorry this happened," Esperanza apologized, approaching with her hands clasped together. "I have no one to leave Valentina with, and I need this job. I promise it won't happen again." Santiago looked up at her, truly studying her face for the first time. Esperanza was a beautiful woman, although she tried not to look it. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a severe bun. She wore simple and dark clothes, and she rarely wore makeup, but there was something in her green eyes, an inner strength and a dignity that could not be hidden. "How long have you been bringing the girl?" he asked, with no trace of accusation in his voice. 2 years, Esperanza admitted, bracing herself for the worst. "And I never saw her because I always hide when I hear footsteps," Valentina intervened naturally. "Mum taught me to be invisible." That answer elicited something like a chuckle from Santiago, though it was more a rusty sound that made his lack of practice at laughing evident. "Invisible?" he repeated. "Yes, like ninjas but without the black clothes." This time Santiago really laughed, a genuine laugh that resonated in the kitchen and surprised both Amparo and Esperanza. That sound had not been heard in the house for 3 years. "You know what?" Santiago said, addressing Valentina. "I think being invisible must be very boring. Wouldn't you like to play in the garden instead of being locked in here?" Valentina's eyes widened, and she looked at her mother for approval. Esperanza was so surprised that she didn't know what to say. "Can I really?" the girl asked. "Only if your mother agrees," Santiago said, looking directly at Esperanza. "Mr. Mendoza, I don't want to be a nuisance. Valentina can stay here in the kitchen like always." "It's not a nuisance," he replied, standing up. "This garden needs children's laughter. It's been too quiet for too long." There was something in the way he said those words that revealed a deep pain, a wound that had not yet healed. Esperanza immediately understood that Santiago was not just talking about the garden. "Mom, can I go to the garden?" Valentina begged, gently pulling on her mother's skirt. Esperanza looked at Santiago, searching his eyes for some sign that this wasn't a cruel joke. What she found was sincerity, and perhaps a need that he himself did not quite understand. "If Mr. Mendoza says you can, then you can," she finally said. Valentina squealed with joy and ran to the door that led to the garden, but stopped before leaving. "Will you come see me play?" she asked Santiago with the naturalness that only children possess. Santiago hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Maybe later. As Valentina ran off into the garden, Santiago stood watching from the window as the little girl began to explore the green space that had remained empty for so long. Her small steps left marks on the perfectly manicured grass, and her shouts of excitement upon discovering each flower, each tree, each corner of the garden filled the air with an energy that had been absent for years. "What's her name?" Santiago asked, without taking his eyes off the window. "Valentina," Esperanza replied. "Valentina Garcia. She's a special girl. She's the most important thing in my life." Santiago then looked at her, and for the first time, Esperanza did not lower her gaze. In that exchange of looks, there was a mutual recognition. Both were parents who had known unconditional love, albeit in very different circumstances. "Her father?" Santiago asked delicately. "He died in an accident when she was 8 months old," Esperanza replied in a firm voice, although the pain was still visible in her eyes. Santiago nodded understandingly. He knew what it was like to raise a child alone, what it was like to face each day with the weight of being the sole emotional and financial support for a family. "You don't have to hide anymore," he finally said. "Valentina can come every day. The garden is good for her." "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me for anything. Just make sure she has everything she needs to play outside. Comfortable shoes, sunscreen." "Yes, sir, of course." Santiago headed for the kitchen exit but stopped at the threshold. "Esperanza," he said, pronouncing her name for the first time. "It seems to me that you and I have been living in the same house for 2 years without truly knowing each other. Sir, from now on, when you've finished your work, have a coffee with me. I'd like to get to know the mother of that extraordinary girl better." Before Esperanza could reply, Santiago had disappeared down the hallway, leaving her with a racing heart and 1,000 questions in her mind. Amparo, who had been watching the entire scene in silence, approached Esperanza with a smile she hadn't shown in years. "In 20 years of working here," she murmured, "I had never seen Mr. Santiago smile like that. That girl of yours has something magical." Esperanza walked over to the window to watch Valentina, who had found a small pond with goldfish and was waving to them as if they were old friends. What had truly happened in those few minutes? Why had Santiago reacted in that way? And most importantly, what would this change mean for her and her daughter's future? As she pondered these questions, she couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had changed in the Mendoza mansion, something that went far beyond allowing a little girl to play in the garden. What secrets from the past will lead Santiago to open up in this way? Will Valentina be the key to healing wounds that seemed impossible to heal? The following days brought a gradual but remarkable transformation to the routine of the Mendoza mansion. Valentina had turned the garden into her personal kingdom, and each passing morning, her presence became more evident and more necessary in the emotional ecosystem of the house. Santiago began to modify his schedule without even realizing it. Where he used to leave early for the office and return late at night, he now found excuses to work from home in the mornings. From his office window, he could watch Valentina play, and those moments had become the most anticipated part of his day. "Look, Mom," Valentina shouted one morning as Esperanza cleaned the living room windows. "The fish already know me." Indeed, the goldfish in the small pond would come closer when they saw the girl arrive, as if they had learned to associate her presence with moments of joy. "Maybe it's because you talk to them so kindly," Esperanza replied, smiling as she watched her daughter kneel by the water, telling the fish about her drawings from the day before. "Do you think they're lonely?" Valentina asked with that seriousness that children sometimes show when they reflect on profound topics. "Why do you say that, honey?" "Because this house is very big and very quiet, like when Daddy went to heaven and we were left alone." Valentina's words reached the open office window, where Santiago had been pretending to read the same document for half an hour. The mention of loneliness by a 4-year-old girl hit him like a punch to the stomach. That afternoon, when Esperanza finished her tasks, she found Santiago waiting for her in the kitchen with 2 freshly brewed cups of coffee. It was the 3rd time that week that they had shared this moment, And although at first it had been uncomfortable for both of them, it had little by little become something natural. "How is Valentina adapting to the garden?" Santiago asked as he approached with one of the cups. "She's delighted. She says it's like living in a fairy tale," Esperanza replied, accepting the coffee with a smile. "Although sometimes I worry that she's being too noisy." On the contrary, this house needed noise. It needed life. There was something in the way Santiago said those words that made Esperanza look at him more closely. During these afternoon conversations, she had begun to see beyond the successful businessman's facade, discovering a man who carried very heavy emotional burdens. "Can I ask you something personal, Mr. Mendoza?" "Santiago," he gently corrected her. "I think after these days we can use two with each other." "Santiago," Esperanza repeated, feeling the familiarity of the name on her lips. "Did you and your wife think about having children?" Santiago's face saddened momentarily, but not with anger, but with a deep sadness. "Elena and I tried for 5 years," he admitted, turning the cup in his hands. "She wanted to be a mother more than anything else in the world. When they finally told us we couldn't have biological children, we decided to adopt. And what happened? The cancer appeared just as we had started the process. Elena fought for 2 years, always saying that she wanted to recover to be the mother that the boy or girl we adopted deserved." Santiago paused, clearly struggling with emotions. "She died without having known that happiness." Esperanza felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm so sorry. It's the first time I've talked about this with anyone," Santiago confessed. "But seeing Valentina, hearing her laughter in the garden where Elena dreamed of seeing our children play, it's as if part of that dream is finally coming true." At that moment, Valentina appeared in the kitchen, her cheeks rosy from the sun and excitement. "Santiago," she exclaimed upon seeing him, running to him naturally. "Do you want to see the drawing I made for you?" Santiago knelt down to be at the girl's level. "Of course, I want to see it." Valentina showed him a paper where she had drawn 3 figures, a tall one with a tie, who was obviously him, a medium one with an apron, Esperanza, and a small one with pigtails, herself, all holding hands in front of the mansion. "It's us," she explained proudly. "Their family." The silence that followed was different from any silence that had existed in that house. It was not empty or painful, but full of unspoken possibilities and feelings that were just beginning to germinate. "It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen in my life," Santiago said in a hoarse voice, clearly moved. "Really? Can you put it on your fridge?" Santiago looked at Esperanza, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Not only will I put it on the fridge," Santiago said, "I'm going to put it in my office so I can see it every day." Valentina squealed with joy and hugged Santiago with the strength of her small arms. It was a spontaneous hug, without reservations, full of the unconditional love that only children can give. Santiago closed his eyes and returned the hug, feeling as if something that had been frozen in his chest for 3 years was finally beginning to thaw. When Valentina pulled away from him, Santiago had tears in his eyes. "Are you sad?" the girl asked with concern. "No, little one, I'm happy. Sometimes adults cry when they're very happy. Like Mum when she sees me do something good." "Exactly like your mum." That night, after Esperanza and Valentina had left, Santiago stayed for a long time in the garden, sitting on the same bench where Elena used to read in the afternoons. For the first time since her death, he didn't just feel pain when he remembered her, but also gratitude. Gratitude for the years they had together, and a strange feeling that she would approve of what he was beginning to feel. The next day, Santiago did something that surprised everyone at the office. He cancelled his afternoon meetings and came home early. He found Valentina in the garden trying to reach a ball that had gotten stuck on a low branch of the oak tree. "Do you need help?" Santiago offered, approaching. "Yes, please." "I'm still too small." Santiago lifted Valentina into his arms so she could reach the ball. The weight of the little girl, the total trust with which she leaned on him, the way she shouted, "I got it!" when she grabbed the ball, all of it awakened feelings in him that he had thought he had lost forever. "Santiago," Valentina said as he lowered her to the ground, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you not have a mommy or a daddy?" The question, phrased with the direct innocence of a child, took him by surprise. "My parents died many years ago," he answered honestly. "Like my daddy," Valentina said naturally. "But now I have Mum, and Mum told me that families aren't always the same. Sometimes people who aren't your blood become your family." Santiago felt his heart race. "Your Mum told you that?" "Yes. And I think you could be part of our family if you want to." At that moment, Esperanza appeared in the garden. She had clearly heard the conversation and didn't know whether to interrupt or disappear. "Valentina," she said softly, "maybe Santiago doesn't—" "I do want to," Santiago interrupted, looking directly at Esperanza. "I want to be part of your family." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Esperanza felt that something fundamental was changing between them, something that went far beyond the employer-employee relationship they had maintained until then. Valentina, oblivious to the emotional tension between the adults, simply smiled and took Santiago's hand and her mother's. "Perfect," she said with satisfaction. "Now we're a real family." As the three of them stood in the garden, holding hands with the afternoon sun bathing them in golden light, neither of them knew that someone was watching them from a first-floor window. Who is spying on this intimate moment? Will this be the beginning of new problems for the family that is just forming? Beatriz Montenegro de Mendoza watched the scene from the garden, from the window of what had been her sister Elena's room, with an expression that combined disbelief and growing indignation. At 42, Beatriz had built her identity around being Elena Mendoza's sister, the perfect widow who guarded the memory of her deceased sister. Elegant even in her moments of greatest turmoil, Beatriz went down the stairs with determined steps, her heels resonating against the marble of the hall with a rhythm that announced a storm. She had come to the mansion, as she did every Wednesday, to supervise that everything was in order and to ensure that Santiago kept Elena's memory alive. What she had found was an unforgivable betrayal of her sister's memory. "Santiago," she called from the door that led to the garden, her voice charged with an authority she had cultivated for years. The three of them turned to her. Valentina, who did not know that elegant woman dressed in black, instinctively hid behind her mother's legs. Esperanza immediately felt the hostility emanating from the newcomer, while Santiago sighed deeply, as if he had been expecting that moment and had feared it at the same time. "Beatriz," Santiago said in a neutral voice, "I wasn't expecting you until later." "Evidently," Beatriz replied, her icy blue eyes disdainfully sweeping over the scene. "May I ask what this means?" "This," Santiago said, keeping Valentina's hand in his, "is my life and my decisions." Beatriz directed her gaze to Esperanza, sizing her up from head to toe with the expertise of someone accustomed to judging people by their appearance and social class. "I see," she murmured, with poorly disguised contempt. "The domestic worker and her daughter. Since when have you allowed staff to bring their children to work, Santiago?" "Since I decided that this house needed to be a home and not a mausoleum," Santiago replied, his voice taking on a firm tone that Esperanza had never heard before. The comment hit Beatriz like a slap. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but her aristocratic composure did not break. "Elena hasn't even been dead for 3 years, and you've already forgotten everything she represented," she said, her voice trembling with contained indignation. "No one has forgotten Elena," Santiago intervened, "but Elena is no longer here, and I am, and I have the right to rebuild my life." "Rebuild your life?" Beatriz repeated with a bitter laugh. "Is that what you're doing? With the cleaning lady and her bastard?" The insult fell upon the garden like a bomb. Esperanza felt her blood run cold, not for her but for Valentina, who, although she didn't fully understand the meaning of the word, knew from the tone that it had been something offensive. Santiago let go of Valentina's hand and took a step toward Beatriz, his face transformed by a fury that he rarely showed. "Never, ever speak like that of Valentina in my presence again," he said in a dangerously low voice. "She is an innocent girl, and I will not tolerate anyone insulting her in my house." "Your house?" Beatriz spat. "This was Elena's house. Everything here bears her mark, her essence, and you are profaning it with this farce." Esperanza, who had remained silent, feeling how every word hit her, finally found her voice. "Ma'am," she said with dignity, picking Valentina up in her arms, "I'm sorry our presence bothers you. We'll leave right now." "No," Santiago said firmly, interposing his arm to block Esperanza's way. "No one is going anywhere. This is my house, and you are welcome here." Beatriz watched the exchange with a mixture of shock and calculation. In the 3 years since Elena's death, she had managed to keep Santiago in a state of perpetual mourning, subtly controlling his decisions and ensuring that no one threatened the idealized memory of her sister. That domestic worker and her daughter represented the first real threat to her influence. "Santiago, we need to talk," Beatriz said, modulating her voice to a more conciliatory tone. "Alone." "There is nothing that Esperanza and Valentina cannot hear," Santiago replied. "Please," Beatriz insisted. "Just 5 minutes. For the love you had for Elena. The mention of Elena worked as she had calculated. Santiago hesitated, looking at Esperanza with a silent apology in his eyes. That's fine, Esperanza murmured, understanding the situation. Valentina and I will wait in the kitchen. Don't go far, Santiago said, and there was a plea in his voice that did not go unnoticed by either woman. As Esperanza and Valentina headed toward the house, Beatriz waited until she was sure they couldn't hear before launching her attack. What are you thinking, Santiago? She began, abandoning all pretense of courtesy. Do you think this woman is with you for love? She's a single domestic worker with a daughter to support. You're her ticket out to a better life. You don't know what you're talking about, Santiago replied, but Beatriz noticed the seed of doubt she had managed to plant. Don't I? Look at you. You are a rich man, alone, vulnerable after the loss of Elena. You are the perfect target for an ambitious woman who knows exactly what buttons to push. Esperanza isn't like that. And how do you know? What do you really know about her past? About how her husband died? About why a young woman is alone with a daughter? Santiago felt a twinge of uncertainty. Indeed, although he had come to know Esperanza in recent weeks, her past was still largely a mystery to him. Elena loved you, Beatriz continued, pressing her advantage. You had something real, something pure. Are you going to betray that memory for a whim with the cleaning lady? It's not a whim, Santiago murmured, but his voice lacked the previous conviction. It's not? Then tell me, what is it? Love, after a few short weeks. Santiago, you're smarter than that. Beatriz watched as the doubts began to corrode Santiago. She had played her cards perfectly. The memory of Elena, the class differences, the uncertainties about Esperanza's motivations. I'm just asking you to think, she said, softening her tone. Elena died hoping you would find happiness, but not this way, not with someone who could be taking advantage of your pain. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Valentina had started to cry silently, nestled in her mother's lap. Why did that lady say ugly things about me, Mom? She asked in a broken voice. Esperanza felt her heart break. Because some people have sick hearts, my love. But you didn't do anything wrong. Am I not going to be able to play in the garden anymore? Her daughter's innocent question unleashed all the insecurities that Esperanza had been repressing. What was she doing? How had she allowed herself and her daughter to get so close to a world that didn't belong to them? Had she misinterpreted Santiago's kindness? Amparo, who had witnessed part of the discussion from the kitchen window, approached them with a worried expression. That woman is pure poison, she murmured in a low voice. She has been poisoning Mr. Santiago for 3 years, keeping him trapped in the past. Maybe she's right, Esperanza said in a voice that was almost inaudible. Maybe we shouldn't be here. Don't say that, Amparo replied firmly. I've seen how the man has changed since you arrived. For the first time in 3 years, he is alive again. But Amparo's words of encouragement could not erase the humiliation that Esperanza had felt, nor the doubts that now assailed her. Had she really misinterpreted the situation? Was she just a domestic worker who had mistaken kindness for something more? When Santiago returned to the kitchen 20 minutes later, he found Esperanza and Valentina getting ready to leave. Where are you going? He asked, although the expression on Esperanza's face gave him the answer. I think it would be better for us to keep our distance, Esperanza said, without looking him in the eyes. What happened today can't happen again. Esperanza, don't listen to what Beatriz said. She doesn't understand. Maybe she understands better than we do, Esperanza interrupted. Valentina and I are employees here. Nothing more. That's not true, and you know it. Esperanza finally looked at him, and Santiago saw a pain in her eyes that went far beyond Beatriz's offensive words. Do I? She asked softly. Because after this conversation with your sister-in-law, you yourself have doubts? The question was like a direct hit. Santiago could not deny it, because Beatriz had managed to sow exactly those doubts. I thought so, Esperanza murmured, interpreting his silence as confirmation. Come on, Valentina. I don't want to go, the girl protested, grabbing onto Santiago's leg. This is our family. Santiago knelt beside Valentina, feeling his heart break as he saw the tears in the little girl's eyes. Valentina, But he couldn't finish the sentence. The doubts planted by Beatriz paralyzed him, preventing him from saying the words that could have changed everything. Esperanza picked Valentina up in her arms, despite the girl's protests, and headed for the exit. Thank you for everything, Mr. Mendoza, she said formally, returning to the distant address of before. Tomorrow, I will send you my resignation. Santiago watched them leave without being able to move, feeling as if something vital was being torn inside him. When the sound of the door closing echoed through the house, he knew that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Beatrice, who had been watching the whole scene from the shadows, smiled with satisfaction. She had won that battle, but she had no idea that the war had barely begun. Can Santiago overcome the doubts planted by Beatrice, or will he lose the opportunity for new happiness forever? The Mendoza mansion returned to the sepulchral silence that had characterized the 3 years after Elena's death, but this time the silence was different. It was not the stillness of a place that had never known joy, but the painful absence of a happiness that had been uprooted. Santiago wandered through the rooms like a ghost, unable to concentrate on work, unable to find peace in any corner of his home. The garden, especially, had become a constant reminder of what he had lost. Every time he looked out the window and saw the pond where Valentina had talked to the fish, he felt as if a knife was being plunged into his chest. 5 days had passed since Esperanza and Valentina's departure. 5 days in which Santiago had rejected all of Beatrice's calls, ignored Amparo's attempts to talk to him, and locked himself in his office, pretending to work, while in reality he did nothing but remember every moment shared with the woman and the girl who had lit up his world. On the 6th day, Amparo decided that enough was enough. "Mr. Santiago," she said, barging into the office without knocking, something she had never done in 20 years of service. "We need to talk." Santiago looked up from the documents he had been pretending to read. He had deep circles under his eyes, a several-day beard, and an expression of defeat that contrasted dramatically with the renewed man he had been just a week ago. "Amparo, I'm not in the mood for—" "I don't care if you're in the mood or not," she interrupted him with a firmness that surprised him. "You're going to listen to what I have to say." Santiago had seen Amparo angry before, but never like this. There was a determination in her eyes that reminded him of his own mother when he was a child and had done something particularly stupid. "You made the biggest mistake of your life," Amparo began bluntly. "And I'm not just referring to letting Esperanza and the girl go. I'm referring to allowing that viper Beatrice to continue controlling your life 3 years after Elena died. Amparo, don't interrupt me. I kept quiet for 3 years, watching that woman hold you prisoner to the past, but I can't take it anymore. Elena is dead, Mr. Santiago, dead, and she wouldn't have wanted you to waste the rest of your life grieving for her." The words were harsh, but Santiago knew they came from a place of genuine love. Amparo had been like a second mother to him, and the only person in the house who dared to tell him uncomfortable truths. "Do you know what Mrs. Elena told me before she died?" Amparo continued, her voice slightly choking up. "She told me, 'Amparo, when I'm no longer here, don't let Santiago forget to live. He deserves to be happy again.'" Those were her exact words. Santiago felt a lump form in his throat. "Elena said that? Do you think I would make it up? Mrs. Elena loved you enough to want your happiness, even if that happiness came from another woman, but you have been so blinded by pain that you couldn't see the gift that life put in front of you." Santiago sank into his chair, feeling the weight of the truth in Amparo's words. "Esperanza is different," the woman continued. "In my 20 years here, I've seen many women who would have done anything to marry you. High society women, ambitious women who saw only money and status in you. But Esperanza, what about Esperanza? Esperanza never asked for anything. She never tried to win you over. She came here to work, to support her daughter, and when you started to take an interest in them, she was afraid. An ambitious woman would not have been afraid. She would have seized the opportunity. But Esperanza got scared because she knew she was in dangerous territory." Santiago reflected on these words. It was true. Esperanza had never tried to get his attention. She had never flirted. She had never hinted at anything. Her presence had been natural, genuine, without calculations or ulterior motives. "And what am I supposed to do now?" Santiago asked in a tired voice. "She resigned. She probably doesn't want to see me again." "Then go look for her. Show her that what you felt together is worth fighting for. What if Beatrice was right? What if she was just being kind to me because I was her boss?" Amparo looked at him with an expression that mixed exasperation and maternal tenderness. "Do you really believe that? After seeing the way she looked at you? After seeing how her daughter adopted you as a father? Children don't lie, Mr. Santiago. Children see with their hearts, not with their heads." Santiago closed his eyes, remembering the way Valentina had hugged him, the total trust with which she had leaned on him, the sincere words about forming a family. "I was afraid. he finally admitted. Of what? Of losing someone I love again. Amparo approached and placed a maternal hand on Santiago's shoulder. Love is always scary, my son, but living without love is even scarier. Look at what you've become these past few days. Is that what you want for the rest of your life? Santiago knew Amparo was right. The last few days had been a hell of loneliness and regret. He had had a glimpse of real happiness, of the possibility of forming a family, of feeling that his life had purpose again, and he had let Beatrice's maneuvers take it away from him. Do you know where she lives? Santiago asked. Of course, Carabanchel. I was tempted to go look for them myself, but this is something you have to do. Santiago stood up with an energy he hadn't felt in days. You're right. I'm going to look for them. I'm going to ask Esperanza for forgiveness, and I'm going to ask her to give me another chance. That's better, Amparo smiled. But first take a shower and shave. You can't show up at a lady's house looking like a beggar. Half an hour later, Santiago was in his car, driving toward Carabanchel with a racing heart and a bouquet of flowers on the passenger seat. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say, but he knew he had to try. He couldn't live with the regret of having let love slip away for the second time in his life. Upon reaching the building where Esperanza and Valentina lived, Santiago was struck by the reality of the difference in their worlds. The building was old, the stairs narrow, the hallways poorly lit. But rather than judging, he felt admired for Esperanza's strength, who had managed to support her daughter and herself in those circumstances. When he reached the third floor and found the right door, he hesitated for a moment. What if she didn't want to see him? What if he had misinterpreted everything that had happened between them? Before he could change his mind, he knocked on the door. The footsteps that approached were small and quick, and Santiago knew immediately that it was Valentina who was coming to open it. When the door opened, the little girl's face lit up with a pure joy that almost made him cry. "Santiago!" she shouted, throwing herself into his arms without a second of hesitation. Santiago lifted her up, feeling his heart fill with the girl's hug again. "Hi, little one," he murmured, kissing her hair. "I missed you so much." "Me too. Mom is very sad. She hasn't stopped crying." At that moment, Esperanza appeared in the hallway, her eyes puffy from crying, and an expression of shock at seeing him there. "Santiago," she murmured, clearly not knowing what to say. "Esperanza," he said, lowering Valentina, but keeping her close. "I need to talk to you. Please." Esperanza hesitated, clearly struggling between her emotions and her instinct for self-preservation. "I don't know if it's a good idea," she finally said. "Please," Santiago insisted. "Just 5 minutes. After that, if you want me to leave, I will, and I won't bother you again." Valentina pulled on her mother's hand. "Say yes, Mum, please." Esperanza looked at her daughter, then at Santiago, and finally sighed. "Okay, 5 minutes." As they entered the small apartment, Santiago prepared for the most important words of his life. Everything depended on the next 5 minutes. Can Santiago and Esperanza overcome the misunderstandings, or will it be too late to mend the damage caused? Esperanza's small apartment was a study in dignity amidst modesty. Although the furniture was simple and some showed signs of wear, everything was impeccably clean and tidy. The walls were decorated with Valentina's drawings, creating a mosaic of bright colors that filled the space with life and creativity. Santiago was immediately moved by the warmth of the home that Esperanza had created for her daughter. It was evident that every object, no matter how humble, had been chosen and placed with love. "You can sit down," Esperanza said, pointing to a small two-seater sofa that took up most of the living room. Valentina immediately settled in beside Santiago, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, while Esperanza remained standing, with her arms crossed in a defensive posture. "Esperanza," Santiago began, "I came to ask for your forgiveness." "Forgiveness for what?" she asked, although her voice trembled slightly. "For doubting you, for allowing Beatrice's poisonous words to make me question what I know is real." Santiago paused, searching for the right words. "For being a coward when you and Valentina needed me to be brave." Esperanza felt her eyes fill with tears, but she fought to maintain her composure. "Santiago, I understand that your sister-in-law is worried. Probably from the outside, all this seems very strange. A rich widower who suddenly takes an interest in his domestic worker." "No," Santiago interrupted vehemently, standing up. "It's not strange, and it's definitely not what Beatrice wants me to believe." "Then what is it?" Esperanza asked, finally looking him in the eyes. Santiago took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth, the moment to be completely honest about his feelings. "It's love," he said simply. "I fell in love with you, Esperanza. With your strength, with your dignity, with the way you love your daughter, with how you make me feel alive for the first time in 3 years." The words fell upon the small apartment like a declaration that changed all the air in the room. Valentina looked between the two adults with curiosity, while Esperanza felt the world sway under her feet. "Santiago," she murmured. "I know it must sound impossible," he continued. "I know our lives are completely different, that we come from different worlds, but I also know that when I'm with you and Valentina, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." Esperanza sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the intensity of the confession. "I felt something too," she admitted in an almost inaudible voice, "but I thought I was imagining things, that maybe I was confusing your kindness with something more. And what do you think now?" Esperanza looked at him for a long time, studying his face, searching for some sign that this could be a cruel illusion. "Now I think I'm terrified," she finally confessed. "Santiago, you are Santiago Mendoza. You have companies, mansions, an entire world that I don't belong to. I am a widowed domestic worker with a daughter. How could we make this work?" "Together," Santiago replied without hesitation. "We would do it together, step by step. And your family, and society, and all the people who are going to think I'm a gold digger?" Santiago approached and knelt in front of the chair where Esperanza was sitting, taking her hands in his. "I don't care what anyone else thinks," he said with intensity. "The only thing that matters to me is what we feel, and what Valentina feels." As if waiting to be mentioned, Valentina came over to them. "Are we a family again?" she asked hopefully. The little girl's innocent question unleashed the tears that Esperanza had been holding back. For the first time in days, she cried not from sadness, but from an overwhelming mixture of relief, hope, and fear. "Esperanza," Santiago said softly, "I know I'm asking a lot of you. I know it's a huge leap of faith, but I also know that what we feel is real. And I think Elena would approve of this." "Elena?" Esperanza asked, surprised by the mention of his deceased wife. "Amparo told me something that Elena said to her before she died. She asked me not to forget to live, that I deserve to be happy again." Santiago smiled sadly. "Elena was generous and full of love. If she could see how happy you and Valentina make me, I think she would be happy for us." Esperanza felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had been carrying the guilt of falling in love with a man who was still grieving his wife, but hearing that Elena herself had wished for Santiago's happiness gave her a peace she hadn't expected. "Santiago," she finally said, "I also fell in love with you, but I need you to understand something important. Tell me. I don't want your money. I don't want you to change my life because you feel sorry for me. If we're going to be together, I want it to be because we truly love each other, not because you think you need to rescue me." Santiago smiled, feeling a renewed admiration for the woman in front of him. "Do you know why I fell in love with you?" he asked. "Precisely because of that. Because you have so much pride and dignity that you're willing to turn down everything I could give you if it doesn't come for the right reasons." "So where does that leave us?" Esperanza asked. "It leaves us here," Santiago said, standing up and helping her up as well. "In this moment, deciding that we are going to try, that we are going to take things day by day, build something real together. And Beatrice? She's not going to take this easily." Santiago's face hardened slightly. "Beatrice is going to have to understand that she no longer has a say or a vote in my life. I allowed her pain over the loss of Elena to control my decisions for too long." Valentina, who had been listening to the conversation with the seriousness of an adult, placed herself between the two. "Does this mean I can go back to the garden?" she asked hopefully. Santiago and Esperanza looked at each other and began to laugh, a liberating laugh that dispelled the last tensions between them. "Yes, little one," Santiago said, lifting her into his arms. "You can go back to the garden. In fact, I want you to consider that garden as your garden. Really, really. And I want you and your mom to consider the mansion as your home." Esperanza felt a pang of panic. "Santiago, this is too fast. We can't—" "I'm not saying you have to move in tomorrow," Santiago reassured her. "I'm saying that when you're ready, when you feel comfortable with the idea, this house is as much yours as it is mine." It was an enormous declaration, laden with implications about the future they were contemplating building together. But for the first time since they had met, the three people in that room felt like what Valentina had been drawing all along, a family. "There's one more thing," Santiago said. lowering Valentina and heading to where he had left the flowers. "I brought you something, Esperanza." He handed her the bouquet of red flowers, simple but beautiful, and Esperanza felt her heart race. No one had given her flowers since her husband had died. "They're beautiful," she murmured, smelling their fragrance. "Like you," Santiago replied, and although the phrase could have sounded cliché in other circumstances, at that moment it was perfect. As Esperanza looked for a vase for the flowers, Santiago stayed with Valentina, who had taken out her colored pencils. "Do you want me to draw something special?" the little girl asked. "Yes," Santiago said. "Draw our future." Valentina concentrated intensely on her paper, and when she finished, she showed them her creation, an improved version of her previous drawing, but this time with an important difference. The small figure with pigtails was not alone in the garden. There were two smaller figures next to her. "Who are those?" Santiago asked, pointing to the new figures. "My little brothers and sisters," Valentina replied naturally, "because all big families have lots of kids." Santiago and Esperanza looked at each other over the girl's head, and in that look there was a silent understanding that the future they were contemplating could be even more beautiful than they had imagined. When it was time for Santiago to leave that night, they had already made plans for the next day. Esperanza would return to work, but this time not as an employee, but as the woman Santiago was courting. It was a subtle but important change that would mark the beginning of a new phase in their lives. "Santiago," Esperanza said as he prepared to leave. "Yes? Thank you for coming. Thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for giving me a second chance," he replied, gently kissing her forehead. As Santiago drove away in his car, Esperanza stood at the window watching the taillights disappear in the distance. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful about the future. But neither of them knew that Beatrice was already planning her next move, determined to destroy that nascent happiness before it could take root. What new maneuvers will Beatrice prepare? Can Santiago and Esperanza protect their love from the attacks to come? The following weeks brought a happiness that Santiago had thought he had lost forever. Esperanza and Valentina spent their days in the mansion, but now the dynamic had changed completely. They no longer hid or apologized for their presence. The house had been transformed into what it should have always been, a place full of life, laughter, and love. Valentina had turned the garden into her personal kingdom, and Santiago discovered the simple joy of teaching a little girl about the flowers, the trees, and the small secrets of nature. In the afternoons, the three of them would have dinner together in the kitchen, a tradition that had started spontaneously and had now become sacred. Esperanza had stopped cleaning the house. Instead, Santiago had hired a cleaning service, insisting that he wanted her to be there as part of the family, not as an employee. This transition had been difficult for Esperanza at first, who struggled with feelings of uselessness, but gradually she had begun to find her place in that new reality. One particularly rainy night in October, while Valentina slept in the guest room that Santiago had converted especially for her, the two adults found themselves alone in the main living room, in front of the lit fireplace. "What are you thinking about?" Santiago asked, noticing Esperanza's pensive expression. "How unreal all this seems," she replied, snuggling closer to him on the sofa. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and discover it was all a dream." Santiago hugged her tighter, breathing in the soft scent of her hair. "If it's a dream, then I never want to wake up," he murmured. Esperanza looked up at him, and in her eyes, Santiago saw a vulnerability that moved him deeply. "Santiago, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "You can tell me anything." Esperanza took a deep breath, clearly struggling with a painful memory. "About my husband's death, it wasn't exactly as I told people." Santiago felt his muscles tense, but he made an effort to maintain a neutral expression. "Tell me." "Carlos had been drinking that night. A lot. We had a terrible fight about money, about his lack of work, about everything." Tears began to roll down Esperanza's cheeks. "He left the house furious, took the car, and the accident happened 2 hours later." Santiago felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because he had feared something much worse, and sadness for the evident pain that memory still caused Esperanza. "Why didn't you tell the truth?" he asked softly. "Because I felt guilty. If we hadn't fought, if I hadn't made him feel so bad about his situation, maybe he wouldn't have drunk so much. Maybe he would still be alive." "Esperanza," Santiago said, taking her face in his hands, "your husband's death was not your fault. Adults are responsible for their own decisions." "I know that in my head," Esperanza sobbed, "but in my heart, I've always carried that guilt." Santiago hugged her as she cried, feeling how the pain she had been holding for years was finally finding release. In that moment of total vulnerability, their connection deepened in a way neither of them had ever experienced before. "I love you," Santiago murmured against her hair. "I love you exactly as you are, with your past, with your pain, with your fears. Nothing you tell me will change that." Esperanza pulled away to look at him, her eyes puffy but bright with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I thought was possible." It was in that moment, in the intimacy created by the confession and shared vulnerability, that their relationship was definitively transformed. What followed was a night of tender and passionate love, where two wounded souls found healing in each other's arms. The storm outside raged with intensity, but inside the mansion, Santiago and Esperanza created their own refuge of peace and love. What neither of them knew was that that same storm had forced Beatrice to seek refuge in the mansion, using her emergency key to enter, and that she had been a witness to more than anyone would have wished for. The next day, Beatrice arrived at Santiago's office without warning, with an expression that mixed indignation and triumph. "We need to talk," she announced, barging into his private office. Santiago, who was reviewing contracts but was actually thinking about the night before, looked up with exasperation. "Beatrice, I've already told you that I don't want to argue about Esperanza again." "Oh, but after what I saw last night, I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say." Something in her tone made Santiago feel a pang of alarm. "What did you see last night?" Beatrice smiled with malice. "I saw enough to understand that your relationship with the domestic worker has progressed considerably. Very considerably." Santiago felt his blood run cold. "Were you spying on me? The storm forced me to take refuge in the house. Imagine my surprise to find such a spectacle." "Leave," Santiago said in a dangerously low voice. "Leave right now." "I don't think you're in a position to give me orders," Beatrice replied. "Do you know what will happen when this becomes public? The scandal will destroy your reputation, your businesses, everything you've built." "I don't care." "No? Well, maybe you should care about what's going to happen to your precious Esperanza when Madrid society finds out that she is the mistress of Elena Mendoza's widower. Do you think she'll be able to withstand that kind of scrutiny? And what about the little girl?" The mention of Valentina was like a punch to the stomach. Santiago stood up, furious. "If you dare to involve Valentina in this, I won't have to do anything," Beatrice smiled. "The media will take care of everything. Do you know how much the gossip magazines would pay for photos of the new girlfriend of the magnate Santiago Mendoza, for details about her past?" Santiago understood the implicit threat. Not only did Beatrice know about his relationship with Esperanza, she was prepared to turn it into a public spectacle. "What do you want?" he asked, hating himself for having to negotiate with her. "I want you to end this farce. That you fire the domestic worker, that you pay her to keep quiet, and that you go back to being the man that Elena deserved." "Elena is dead," Santiago shouted, finally losing his composure. "Dead! And I have the right to rebuild my life. Not this way. Not with a gold digger who is taking advantage of your pain. Esperanza isn't a gold digger." "No? Then why don't you tell her about the money?" Santiago froze. "What money?" Beatrice smiled triumphantly, knowing she had found his weak spot. "You didn't tell her? You didn't tell her that Elena left you 20 million euros in a trust fund for when you found love again? That she specifically wanted that money to be used for your new family?" Santiago felt the world sway around him. It was true. Elena had left those instructions in her will, but he had completely blocked out that information, too submerged in pain to process it. "Isn't it interesting," Beatrice continued, "that Esperanza appears in your life just as you're starting to heal, that she's suddenly so available, so perfect, so willing to form a family with you?" "Esperanza doesn't know anything about that money," Santiago murmured, but the doubts began to infiltrate his mind like poison. "Are you sure? How can you be sure of anything about her? Did you check her story? Did you really investigate how her husband died?" Each question was like a stab. Santiago realized that, in fact, he had accepted Esperanza's version of her past without really questioning it. "You have a week," Beatrice said, heading for the door. "End this yourself, or I will make sure it ends in a much more painful way for everyone involved." When Beatrice left, Santiago collapsed into his chair, feeling as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The doubts he had managed to overcome returned with a devastating force. What if Beatrice was right? What if he had been a fool for trusting so blindly? What if Esperanza's confession about her husband's death had been calculated to generate sympathy? For the first time since they had reconciled, Santiago began to question everything he thought he knew about the woman he had fallen in love with. That night, when he got home and saw Esperanza and Valentina waiting for him with a prepared dinner and radiant smiles, he couldn't help but wonder if it was all a perfectly orchestrated performance. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and Santiago didn't know if he would have the strength to resist their growth. Can Beatrice's manipulations finally destroy the love between Santiago and Esperanza? Or will Santiago find a way to see through the lies before it's too late? The following days were a silent torment for Santiago. On the outside, he maintained the facade of normalcy. He had dinner with Esperanza and Valentina, played in the garden, smiled at the appropriate moments. But inside, the doubts planted by Beatrice had taken deep root, poisoning every moment of happiness with questions he couldn't stop asking himself. Was it possible that Esperanza had planned everything from the beginning? Had she investigated his financial situation before getting the job? Had the confession about her husband been a calculated manipulation to generate sympathy? Esperanza noticed the change immediately. Santiago had become distant, distracted, as if he were physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. His goodnight kisses had become mechanical, their conversations superficial, and his gaze no longer had that warmth that had characterized the last few weeks. "Is everything okay?" she asked one night after dinner, when Santiago was heading to his office instead of staying to watch a movie with them as was their custom. "Just work," he replied without looking her in the eyes. "I have some matters to resolve." Esperanza felt a pang of anxiety. She knew that distance. She had experienced the emotional withdrawal during the last months of her marriage to Carlos. The difference was that this time she didn't understand what had caused the change. "Santiago," she said, approaching him, "if there's something bothering you, we can talk about it." For a moment, Santiago was tempted to confront her directly, to ask about the trust fund, about her knowledge of his financial situation, but the fear of the answer paralyzed him. "It's nothing I can't handle alone," he murmured, distractedly kissing her forehead before disappearing into his office. Esperanza was left in the hallway, feeling as if she had been slapped. Santiago's transformation was so radical that she began to wonder if she had done something wrong, if she had crossed some invisible line that she didn't know existed. Valentina, with the intuition that children often possess, had also noticed the change. "Why is Santiago sad?" she asked her mother as she was getting ready for bed. "He's not sad, honey," Esperanza lied. "He's just busy with work." "But he doesn't read me stories before bed anymore," Valentina observed, with a sadness that broke her mother's heart. It was true. Santiago had stopped participating in the nightly routine that he had enjoyed so much in the previous weeks. The small traditions they had created as a family were disappearing one by one, and Esperanza didn't understand why. That night, after tucking Valentina in, Esperanza made a decision. She couldn't continue living in that uncertainty. If Santiago had changed his mind about their relationship, if he had decided it had been a mistake, she had the right to know. She went to the office and knocked softly on the door. "Come in," Santiago's voice said from inside. She found him sitting in front of his desk, but instead of working, he was simply looking out the window at the dark garden. "Santiago, we need to talk," Esperanza said, closing the door behind her. "It's late, Esperanza. Maybe tomorrow." "No," she interrupted with a firmness that surprised him. "It's going to be now. Something has changed in the last few days, and I deserve to know what it is." Santiago turned to look at her, and what he saw on her face was determination mixed with pain. Esperanza was no longer going to allow him to avoid her. "Is there another woman?" she asked directly. "What? No, of course not. Then what is it? Have you decided that it was a mistake to get involved with me? That the social differences are too great after all?" Santiago stood up, feeling the weight of Esperanza's direct questions. He had been avoiding that conversation, but now he had no choice but to face it. "Esperanza," he began, but stopped. How could he ask about the trust fund without revealing his doubts? How could he question her honesty without completely destroying what they had built? "You know what?" Esperanza said, interpreting his silence as confirmation of her worst fears. "You don't have to explain. I understand." "No, you don't understand." "Yes, I do understand," she replied with a broken but dignified voice. "I understand that this was beautiful while it lasted, but that reality has begun to impose itself. I understand that a man like you can't really build a life with a woman like me." "That's not true." "Then what is? Explain it to me, because I've spent a week feeling like I did something terrible, and I have no idea what it is." The genuine anguish in Esperanza's voice hit Santiago like a punch. He saw her pain, her confusion, her frustration, and realized that the doubts planted by Beatriz had led him to hurt the very person he most wanted to protect. "Beatriz came to see me," he finally admitted. Esperanza's expression changed immediately. The confusion turned into understanding, and then into a cold anger. "And you believed her? She told me things I didn't know if they were true." "What things?" Santiago hesitated, but he knew there was no going back. He had to be completely honest. "She told me about a trust fund that Elena established, money she left specifically for when I found love again. Beatriz insinuated that you might know about it." Esperanza looked at him for a long time, her expression going through a range of emotions: shock, pain, indignation, and finally, a deep sadness. "You think I knew about that money?" she asked, in an almost inaudible voice. "I don't know what to believe." "You don't know what to believe?" Esperanza repeated, her voice rising in volume. "After everything we've shared, after I opened my heart to you, after I told you my most painful secrets, you don't know what to believe." Santiago realized too late how terrible his words sounded, what he was really saying. "Esperanza, I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," she interrupted him. "You wanted to doubt me. You wanted to believe that I am exactly what your sister-in-law says I am, a ruthless gold digger who takes advantage of your pain. That's not true, isn't it? Then why have we spent a week living in silence? Why have you been treating me like a stranger? Why didn't you come and talk to me directly instead of assuming the worst?" Each question was a valid accusation, and Santiago realized that he had no defensible answers. "Do you know when I found out you were rich?" Esperanza continued, now crying openly. "Really rich, not just comfortable? When I took Valentina to the doctor last week, and the receptionist asked me if I was Santiago Mendoza's girlfriend, I had to Google your name to understand why she was asking me that." Santiago felt his soul drop to his feet. "Esperanza, until that week, I thought you had a nice house and a good job. I had no idea of the magnitude of your fortune. And now I find out that there's money specifically designated for your new family, and you think I knew." The truth in Esperanza's words was undeniable. Her shock seemed genuine, her pain authentic. Santiago realized that he had allowed Beatriz's manipulations to destroy his ability to trust his own instincts. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, approaching her. "Esperanza, I'm so sorry." "Are you?" she sobbed. "Are you sorry for doubting me? Are you sorry for believing that I'm capable of that manipulation? I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for being an idiot. I'm sorry for allowing Beatriz to poison me against you." "And now what?" Esperanza asked, wiping away her tears. "Now that you know I didn't know about the money, can you trust me again, until the next time your sister-in-law fills your head with doubts?" The question hit Santiago like a lightning bolt. Esperanza was right. If it had been so easy for Beatriz to sow doubts this time, what would stop her from doing it again? "There won't be a next time," Santiago promised. "I'm going to ask Beatriz to give me back the keys to the house. She won't interfere in our lives anymore. What if she finds another way? What if she convinces other people that I'm a gold digger? Will you doubt me every time?" Santiago took Esperanza's face in his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "No," he said with all the conviction he could muster. "I will not doubt you again. I love you, Esperanza. I love your honesty, your integrity, your strength, and I promise I will never again allow anyone to make me question that." Esperanza wanted to believe him, but the damage had been done. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended. "I need time," she finally said. "I need time to process all this." Santiago nodded, although he felt his heart breaking. "How much time?" "I don't know, I need time." That night Esperanza stayed in the guest room with Valentina, and Santiago was alone in his room, feeling as if he had destroyed the most valuable thing he had had in years. The next day, when he came down for breakfast, he found a note in the kitchen. "We're going to stay home for a few days. Valentina is sick." Santiago knew it was an excuse, but he also knew he had deserved it. He had betrayed Esperanza's trust at the most vulnerable moment of their relationship, when she had begun to believe that they could really have a future together. What he didn't know was that Beatriz was already planning her next move, determined to take advantage of the crisis she had created to deliver the final blow. Can Santiago win back Esperanza's trust? Or will it be too late to save their love from Beatriz's machinations? The days that followed were the darkest Santiago had lived since Elena's death. The mansion, which had come to life with the presence of Esperanza and Valentina, returned to its sepulchral silence. But this time the emptiness was even more painful because Santiago knew exactly what he had lost. Every morning he waited for the phone to ring, for a message to appear, any sign that Esperanza was willing to talk. But his calls were not answered. His messages went unanswered. And when he finally gathered the courage to go to the apartment in Carabanchel, he found that no one was home. Amparo watched him with a mixture of pity and exasperation. "I told you," she muttered as she prepared a breakfast that Santiago barely touched. "I warned you about that viper Beatriz, but you didn't listen." "I don't need lectures, Amparo," Santiago replied with weariness. "What you need is to find that woman and that little girl and fix the mess you made. What if she doesn't want me to find her? What if she's decided that it's not worth fighting for?" Amparo let the dishes drop with more force than necessary. "Then you will be the most foolish man in Madrid," she declared. "That woman loves you, Mr. Santiago. She truly loves you. But love has limits and you are pushing hers." Santiago knew Amparo was right, but he didn't know how to begin to fix the damage he had caused. He had betrayed Esperanza's trust at the most vulnerable moment of their relationship, when she had begun to believe that they could really have a future together. It was then that the call that would change everything came. "Mr. Mendoza," a female voice he didn't recognize said. "Yes, this is he. My name is Carmen Ruiz. I'm an investigative journalist. I'm working on an article about you, and I was wondering if we could meet for an interview." Santiago frowned. He rarely gave interviews, and even less to journalists he didn't know. "What kind of article?" "About your personal life, specifically about your relationship with Esperanza Garcia." Santiago's heart stopped for a moment. "I have no comment on my private life." "I understand your reluctance," the journalist continued, "but I must inform you that we will publish the article with or without your cooperation. It would be beneficial for you if we could include your side of the story." "What story?" "About how a domestic worker managed to seduce one of the richest men in Spain. About the 20 million trust fund that your late wife left for your new family. About Mrs. Garcia's hidden past." Santiago felt his blood run cold. Beatriz had followed through on her threat. "Who gave you this information?" "I have reliable sources. Would you like to comment?" Santiago hung up the phone with trembling hands. His worst nightmare was becoming a reality. Esperanza and Valentina were going to be publicly exposed, turned into a spectacle for the entertainment of others. He immediately dialed Esperanza's number, and to his surprise, she answered. "Santiago," she said in a cold voice. "Esperanza, we need to talk. It's urgent. I already told you I need time. The media is going to publish an article about us, about you, about Valentina, about everything." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What?" she finally murmured. "Beatrice leaked information to the press. They're going to publish about the trust fund, about our relationship. And why are you calling me? To warn me that your world is about to destroy mine?" The bitterness in Esperanza's voice was like a knife in Santiago's heart. "To ask you to let me protect you, for us to come together and face this as a family." "A family?" Esperanza laughed bitterly. "The same family you didn't trust a week ago. Esperanza, please. I know I made terrible mistakes, but now is not the time to settle scores." "Valentina doesn't deserve to be exposed like this." The mention of her daughter immediately changed Esperanza's tone. "What are they going to say about Valentina?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it will be public. Her address, her school, everything." Esperanza felt the world crumble around her. It was one thing to deal with problems in her relationship with Santiago, but to involve her innocent daughter in a media scandal was unacceptable. "What do you propose?" she finally asked. "Come home, here you're protected. We can deal with this together. Your house. Santiago, I don't have a home with you. I don't even know if I have a relationship with you." The words hit Santiago like a slap, but he knew he had deserved them. "Esperanza, I understand your pain, I understand your anger, but right now the most important thing is to protect Valentina. Afterwards we can talk about us, about whether there's any possibility of fixing what I broke." Esperanza closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. On the one hand, every fiber of her being screamed at her not to trust Santiago again, not to put herself in a vulnerable position once more. On the other hand, the threat to her daughter was real and immediate. "1 week, she finally said. "We'll stay for 1 week until this passes. But we'll sleep in separate rooms, and when it's all over, Valentina and I will leave for good." "Esperanza, no, those are my conditions. Either you accept them, or we'll manage on our own." Santiago knew he was not in a position to negotiate. I accept your conditions. 2 hours later, Esperanza and Valentina arrived at the mansion with a small suitcase. Valentina immediately ran to Santiago, who lifted her into his arms as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Santiago, you're not busy with work anymore?" the little girl asked with joy. Santiago looked at Esperanza over Valentina's head, seeing a silent warning in her eyes. "Don't involve the girl in our problems." "No, little one. Now I have time for you," he replied, kissing her forehead. That night, while Valentina slept, Santiago and Esperanza met in the kitchen. The tension between them was palpable, but there was also a mutual need to understand what they would face together. "When does the article come out?" Esperanza asked. "Probably this week. My lawyer is trying to stop it, but the damage is already done." Santiago nodded. "Esperanza, I want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to minimize the impact on you and Valentina. And how do you plan to do that? By denying I exist? By saying I was just an employee? No, by telling the truth, that I love you, that I want to build a life with you, that the insinuations in the article are malicious lies promoted by people who can't accept my happiness." Esperanza looked at him with surprise. "Would you do that? Would you publicly confront your sister-in-law?" "It's about time I confronted Beatriz. I should have done it years ago." For the first time since their forced reconciliation, Esperanza saw a glimpse of the man she had fallen in love with. The man who had been willing to defy social conventions for love. "Santiago," she said softly, "I don't want you to think you're going to buy my forgiveness by facing the media. What you broke between us goes much deeper than any magazine article." "I know," he replied, "but I also can't stand by while they publicly destroy you for the crime of loving me." Can Santiago protect Esperanza and Valentina from the media scandal? Will this crisis be the one that finally unites them or separates them forever? Beatriz's response was not long in coming. 2 days after Santiago's press conference, the media received a devastating statement. Beatriz Montenegro de Mendoza announced that she was initiating legal action to contest the validity of Elena's trust fund, alleging that her sister had been under undue influence when she wrote it. Santiago received the legal notification on a Friday morning while having breakfast with Esperanza and Valentina. As he read the documents, he felt his blood run cold. "What's wrong?" Esperanza asked, noticing his expression. Santiago looked at Valentina, who was focused on her cereal, and then back at Esperanza. "Beatriz is contesting Elena's will," he murmured. "She's alleging that Elena was not in her right mind when she established the trust fund." Esperanza felt her stomach churn. "Can she do that?" "Apparently, yes. She hired one of the best law firms in Madrid. But that means... It means she's willing to destroy her own sister's memory to separate us," Santiago finished bitterly. The news reached the media that same afternoon, creating a new wave of public scrutiny. The headlines were even more sensationalist. "Family war for millions. Sister-in-law fights against scandalous romance." That night, while Valentina slept, Santiago and Esperanza sat in the office to discuss the situation. "Santiago," Esperanza said in a tired voice, "maybe we should stop this here." "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe your sister-in-law is right. Maybe we're too different. Maybe this is causing too much damage to too many people." Santiago approached her, taking her hands in his. "Is that what you really think? Or is it what Beatriz wants you to think?" Esperanza struggled to find the right words. "I think I'm tired," she finally admitted. "Tired of fighting, tired of my daughter growing up surrounded by scandals, tired of feeling like I have to constantly justify my place in your life." "You don't have to justify anything." "Don't I? Santiago, I've spent weeks feeling like I'm on trial. First with you when you doubted my motivations, now with the media, now with your sister-in-law. When does this end?" Santiago didn't have an easy answer to that question. The truth was that as long as Beatriz kept fighting, the drama would continue. "It ends when we take control of the situation," he finally said. "And how do you propose we do that?" Santiago had been reflecting on that very question for hours. "By getting married," he said simply. Esperanza looked at him in shock. "What? By getting married? Now? This week?" "Santiago, you can't be serious. You can't propose marriage as a legal strategy." "I'm not proposing it as a legal strategy," he replied, kneeling in front of her. "I'm proposing it because I love you, because I want you to be my wife, because I want to legally adopt Valentina and form a real family with you." Esperanza felt her eyes fill with tears. "What about the ring and the traditional ceremony? And the time to plan? Do you need those things to know that you want to spend the rest of your life with me?" The question went straight to the heart. Esperanza realized that, despite all the problems, despite the doubts and fears, the answer was clear. "No," she whispered. "I don't need those things." "Then marry me. Tomorrow, next week, whenever you want. But marry me." Esperanza looked him in the eyes, seeing in them a determination and a love that dispelled all her remaining doubts. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Santiago lifted her into his arms, spinning her in the air, as they both laughed with a joy they hadn't felt in weeks. "Can I tell Valentina?" Esperanza asked when he put her down. "We can tell her together, tomorrow morning." That night, for the first time since the reconciliation, they slept in the same room. There was no physical passion, but something deeper, an emotional reconnection that had been missing. The next morning they found Valentina in the kitchen with Amparo, who gave them a knowing smile. "Valentina," Santiago said, kneeling beside the little girl, "your mum and I have something important to tell you." "What is it?" Valentina asked with curiosity. "We're getting married," Esperanza announced. "Santiago is going to be your official dad." Valentina's reaction was immediate and explosive. She squealed with joy, jumped out of her chair, and hugged the two adults so tightly that she almost knocked them to the floor. "We're a real family now," she exclaimed. "Like in my drawing." Amparo, who had been watching the scene with tears in her eyes, came over to hug the three of them. "Mrs. Elena would be very happy," she murmured to herself. "Very happy to see that this house finally has a family again." The wedding preparations were deliberately simple. Santiago wanted a private, intimate ceremony, focused on love and not on spectacle. They would get married in the mansion's garden, with only Amparo, Joaquin, the gardener, and a few close friends as witnesses. But as they planned their future, Beatriz was planning one last devastating blow. She had hired a private investigator to dig into Esperanza's past, and what he had found was potentially explosive. Carlos Garcia's accident had not been as simple as Esperanza had described. There was evidence that Carlos had been involved in shady dealings before his death, gambling debts, dangerous associations. Beatriz knew that if that information came to light, it would not only destroy Esperanza's reputation, but also put Valentina's custody in jeopardy. The day before the wedding, Beatriz showed up at the mansion without warning, with a folder full of documents that would change everything. "Santiago," she said when he opened the door, "we need to talk. It's about your future wife's past, and I assure you that after you hear what I have to say, you'll want to cancel this wedding." What secrets from Esperanza's past did Beatriz discover? Will this be the final blow that will destroy Santiago and Esperanza's happiness forever? Santiago looked at Beatriz with a mixture of weariness and contempt that he didn't bother to hide. "There is nothing you can tell me that will change what I feel for Esperanza," he declared, blocking the entrance. "Not even that your precious fiancé has been lying to you about the circumstances of her husband's death?" Beatriz replied with a venomous smile. Santiago felt a pang of alarm, but he stood his ground. "Esperanza told me about the accident, about the drinking. Did she tell you about the gambling debts? About the loan sharks Carlos owed money to? About the fact that the accident may not have been so accidental?" Beatriz's words hit Santiago like a hammer. He saw the folder in his sister-in-law's hands and knew, with a terrible premonition, that it contained real evidence. "Let me see that," he demanded. Beatriz handed him the folder with a triumphant expression. "Read everything, and then tell me if you really know the woman you're planning to marry tomorrow." Santiago opened the folder with trembling hands. What he found was devastating. Police documents that showed that Carlos Garcia had been under investigation for activities related to illegal gambling, records of significant debts to loan sharks, and an insurance report that questioned the circumstances of the accident. "This could be faked," Santiago murmured, although his voice lacked conviction. "Every document has been verified by my investigator. They are authentic." Santiago continued reading, feeling as if the ground was crumbling under his feet. There were transcripts of police interviews where neighbors mentioned violent arguments between Carlos and Esperanza in the weeks leading up to the accident, including a domestic violence report that had been withdrawn. "Why are you doing this?" Santiago asked, closing the folder. "Because Elena was my sister, and I will not allow her memory to be tarnished by an adventurer who has been lying to you from day one." At that moment, Esperanza appeared in the hall, drawn by the voices. Upon seeing Beatriz, her face immediately hardened. "What is she doing here?" she asked. Santiago looked at her, and Esperanza immediately saw that something had changed. There was a tension in his eyes, a distance that alarmed her. "Esperanza," Santiago said in a strange voice, "we need to talk." alone. Beatriz smiled with satisfaction. I think my work here is done. Santiago, I hope you make the right decision. When Beatriz left, Santiago and Esperanza went to the office. The folder rested on the desk like an unexploded bomb. What is that? Esperanza asked, although she already had a horrible idea of what it might contain. Information about your husband, about the circumstances of his death. Esperanza felt her blood run cold. What kind of information? Santiago opened the folder and showed her the documents. He saw Esperanza's face go from shock to horror, and finally to a painful resignation. Is it true? Santiago asked. Was Carlos involved in illegal gambling? Did he hit you? Were there threats? Esperanza sank into a chair, feeling as if her whole world was collapsing. Yes, she whispered. It's true. The confession hit Santiago like a physical punch. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid, Esperanza replied with tears in her eyes. I was afraid that if you knew the whole truth about my past, you could never love me. What whole truth? What else have you hidden from me? Esperanza took a deep breath, knowing that the time had come to tell the whole story. Carlos changed after Valentina's birth. He lost his job and started gambling as a way to make easy money. At first they were small amounts, but it soon became an addiction. Santiago listened in silence, his face a mask of contradictory emotions. The debts grew quickly. They started calling the house, threatening. Carlos became violent, especially when he drank, which was more and more frequent. Did he hit you? Santiago asked in a hoarse voice. Yes, Esperanza admitted. At first just pushes, then slaps. I filed a report once, but I withdrew it when Carlos promised to change. And the night of the accident? Esperanza closed her eyes, reliving the most painful moment of her life. 2 men came to our house late in the afternoon. Loan sharks. They said that if Carlos didn't pay, they would take action. Carlos was terrified, but also furious. He drank more than ever that night, shouting at me that it was all my fault, that if I were a better wife he wouldn't have needed to gamble. And then? He left the house saying he was going to get the money somehow, that he would do anything to solve the problem. I was afraid he was going to do something desperate. Santiago walked over to the window, turning his back to Esperanza. Do you think the accident was really accidental? I don't know, Esperanza sobbed. I'll never know. Maybe he lost control because of the drinking. Maybe he decided it was the only way out. The police said there was no evidence of suicide, but I've always had my doubts. And why did you lie to me about all this? Because when I started working here, I just wanted a new life for Valentina and me. I wanted to leave all that nightmare behind. And when you started to take an interest in us, I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you would think we were damaged goods. Santiago turned to look at her, seeing the genuine pain in her eyes. Anything else? He asked. Is there any other secret I should know? No, Esperanza replied firmly. That's the whole truth, all of it. The silence that followed was deafening. Santiago struggled between his love for Esperanza and the feeling that he had been deceived once again. Santiago, Esperanza finally said, I know I should have told you everything from the beginning, but you have to understand that when you've lived with fear and shame for so long, it's hard to trust someone completely. And now what? Santiago asked. How can I be sure there are no more secrets, that there won't be more surprises from the past? Esperanza stood up, approaching him with determination. Because I'm giving you the opportunity to walk away now, she said in a firm voice. If you can't accept my past, if you can't love me knowing the whole truth, then it's better that we end this here. Are you breaking up with me? I'm setting you free. I'm giving you the opportunity to choose with full knowledge of who I really am. Not the idealized version you've loved, but the real woman, with all her scars and mistakes. Santiago looked at her for a long time, processing everything he had heard. Part of him was furious at having been deceived again, but another part understood the fear and shame that had motivated Esperanza's lies. Do you love me? He finally asked. More than my own life, Esperanza replied without hesitation. And would you do anything to protect Valentina? Anything. Even give up you if I had to. Santiago nodded slowly. Then I understand why you did what you did. Does that mean you forgive me? It means I need time to process all this. The wedding? We'll have to postpone it. Esperanza felt as if her heart had been ripped from her chest, but she nodded with dignity. I understand, she murmured. Valentina and I will leave tomorrow morning. No, Santiago said quickly. Don't leave. Stay here while I sort everything out. I need time to think. That night, Esperanza stayed up very late, walking through the garden and reflecting on everything he had discovered. At dawn, He had made a decision that would change everything. Can Santiago overcome this new revelation, or will it be the definitive end of their love story? Santiago did not sleep that night. He spent the hours before dawn walking through the garden, reflecting on everything he had learned, not only about Esperanza, but about himself and what love really meant. At dawn, he found Esperanza sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, clearly having been awake for hours. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but there was a serenity on her face that surprised him. "Good morning," he said softly, sitting down across from her. "Good morning," Esperanza replied. "Did you sleep at all?" "No, but I thought a lot." Esperanza nodded, preparing for what she knew would be a decisive conversation for their lives. "I've been thinking about everything you told me yesterday," Santiago began, "and I've come to a few conclusions. I'm listening. First, I understand why you hid the truth about Carlos from me. If I had lived what you lived, I probably would have done the same." Esperanza felt a glimmer of hope, but she held back from expressing it. "Second," Santiago continued, "I realized that I have been asking for perfection when I myself have been far from perfect. I doubted you when you needed me the most. I allowed Beatrice to poison my mind against you, and I put you in impossible situations again and again." "Santiago, let me finish," he gently interrupted her. "Third, I realized that real love is not loving someone in spite of their flaws, but loving them including their flaws. And you, with your painful past, with your fears, with your mistakes, are exactly the woman I fell in love with." Tears began to roll down Esperanza's cheeks. "What does that mean?" she whispered. "It means that if you still want me, if you're still willing to take a chance with me, I would like to marry you. Not tomorrow, because I don't want you to feel that I'm pressuring you after all this. But soon, very soon." Esperanza stood up from her chair and approached him, taking his face in her hands. "Of course, I still want you," she said. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that there will be no more secrets between us, that if something bothers you or worries you, you'll come directly to me, instead of allowing doubts to grow in silence." "I promise you," Santiago replied, kissing her palms. "And do you promise me that there will be no more secrets from the past? That you will trust me enough to tell me everything, no matter how painful it is?" "I promise you." They kissed then, a kiss full of forgiveness, understanding, and a love that had survived tests that would have destroyed stronger relationships. "Mom," Valentina's sleepy voice came from the hallway. "Why are you two awake so early?" Santiago and Esperanza separated, smiling through their tears. "Come here, little one," Santiago called. Valentina approached, still in her pajamas, and Santiago lifted her to sit her on his lap. "Valentina," Esperanza said, "Santiago and I have decided to get married, but not today as we had planned. We're going to wait a little longer to make sure everything is perfect." "But are you getting married?" Valentina asked with concern. "Yes," Santiago confirmed. "We are definitely getting married, and I'm going to officially adopt you to be your legal father." Valentina squealed with joy and hugged the two adults tightly. "We're the happiest family in the world!" she exclaimed. As the three of them hugged, none of them noticed that Amparo had appeared at the kitchen entrance and was watching them with tears of joy in her eyes. "That's how it should be," she murmured to herself. "That's exactly how it should be." 2 weeks later, Santiago and Esperanza were married in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. Esperanza wore a simple but elegant dress that Santiago had insisted on buying for her, and Valentina was the proudest flower girl that had ever existed. The ceremony was officiated by a judge who was a friend of Santiago's, with only Amparo, Joaquin, and a few close friends as witnesses. There was no press, no scandal, just pure love and genuine happiness. When the judge declared them husband and wife, Santiago kissed Esperanza with a passion that reflected not only love, but also gratitude for having found his soulmate after so much pain. "I love you, Mrs. Mendoza," he murmured against her lips. "I love you, my husband," Esperanza replied, savoring the words. Valentina clapped with enthusiasm, and Amparo threw rose petals as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. That night, after Valentina had fallen asleep in her new officially permanent room, Santiago and Esperanza sat in the garden under the stars. "Do you regret anything?" Esperanza asked, snuggling against him. "Only not having met you sooner," Santiago replied, kissing her hair. "And Beatrice, do you think she'll continue to cause problems?" Santiago had thought a lot about that. "I think Beatrice will finally understand that she lost. That Elena is gone, that I've moved on, and that she needs to do that too. And the trust fund. My lawyer says her lawsuit has no merit. Elena was completely sane when she wrote her will, and there is enough medical evidence to prove it. Esperanza nodded, feeling finally that they could leave all the battles of the past behind. Santiago, she said softly, there's something I want to tell you. Santiago felt a pang of alarm. What? Esperanza smiled, seeing his concern. It's nothing bad. It's something good, very good. Tell me. I'm pregnant. Santiago was completely still for a moment, processing the words. Pregnant? He repeated. With twins, Esperanza added with a radiant smile. Santiago looked at her in total astonishment, then shouted with joy and lifted her into the air, spinning her under the stars. We're having twins, he shouted. Valentina is going to have 2 little brothers. Or sisters, Esperanza laughed. Or one of each. Santiago put her down and kissed her passionately. When? He asked. In 7 months. The doctor says everything is perfect. Santiago knelt and gently kissed Esperanza's still flat belly. Hello, little ones, he murmured. I'm your daddy, and I already love you more than life itself. Esperanza ran her fingers through Santiago's hair, feeling a happiness so complete that she was afraid it was too good to be true. Are you happy? She asked. Santiago stood up and looked her in the eyes. I'm more than happy, I'm complete. For the first time in my life, I'm completely complete. As they embraced under the stars, both of them knew that they had found something extraordinary. Not just love, but the understanding that true love is not the absence of problems, but the presence of a commitment to face them together. Their story had begun with a domestic worker who needed a job and a widower who had lost hope. It had ended with a family that had shown that love, when it is real, can overcome any obstacle, and in the garden where Valentina had first drawn her dream of a family, 3 children now played under the loving gaze of the parents who had made that dream a reality. Love had triumphed, as it always should. End. Epilogue. 10 years later, Santiago Mendoza was in his office reviewing the plans for the new charity foundation that he and Esperanza had established, the Elena Beatriz Foundation, dedicated to helping single women with children find employment and dignified housing. A gentle knock on the door distracted him from his documents. Dad, came the voice of Valentina, now a beautiful and confident 14-year-old. Come in, honey. Valentina entered with a mischievous smile. Mom says for you to come home. Diego and Matias decided they want to be chefs and they cooked something special for dinner. Santiago laughed, imagining the mess that his 7-year-old sons had likely created in the kitchen. Is it safe to go home? Amparo has already cleaned up most of the chaos, Valentina laughed, but their faces when you see what they did. It's priceless. As they drove home together, Valentina looked at her adoptive father with affection. Dad, she said softly, do you ever regret marrying Mom? Santiago looked at her with surprise. Why do you ask me that? Because sometimes I think about how your life would have been different if you hadn't met us. Quieter, less chaotic. Santiago pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to look directly at his daughter. Valentina, he said with all the seriousness he could muster, before I met your mother and you, I wasn't living. I was existing. You taught me what it means to be truly alive. Really? Really. And you know what? Even if I had known from the beginning all the challenges we would face, all the problems we would have to overcome, I would have chosen the exact same life. Because a life full of love, even with its difficulties, will always be better than an empty but perfect life. When they arrived at the mansion, they were greeted by shouts of joy from the twins, who immediately dragged them to the dining room to show off their culinary masterpiece, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into heart shapes. Esperanza was waiting for them at the table, her eyes sparkling with amusement and love. How was your day? Santiago asked, kissing her as he had done every day for 10 years. Perfect, Esperanza replied, like every day since I've known you. As they ate the slightly burnt sandwiches and listened to the twins tell jumbled stories about their day at school, Santiago reflected on the miracle of his life. It had begun with a drawing by a little girl who dreamed of a family. It had grown through doubts, secrets, and manipulations. It had matured through forgiveness, understanding, and commitment. And now, sitting at the table with his wife, his 3 children, and Amparo, who had officially become the family's grandmother, Santiago knew that they had created something extraordinary, not just a family, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations. In the garden, the pond where Valentina had first talked to the goldfish shone under the moonlight. And if someone listened carefully, they could almost hear the echo of children's laughter, who had grown up knowing that true love when nurtured with patience and protected with determination, can overcome any obstacle. This was the story of the heart's awakening, a story that showed that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as domestic workers with small children who draw dreams on paper and turn them into reality.